Hello and welcome to the programme, this second hour of The Context, where every day we examine some of the latest developments from President Trump's second term. Later, we'll take a look at the unlikely resistance to Donald Trump's crypto ambitions.
And he's been one of his fiercest allies, so why is billionaire businessman Elon Musk speaking out against one of the president's signature policies?
But first, pressure continues to mount on Israel over the situation in Gaza. This hour, we're following developments here in Washington, D.C. and across the globe.
In Gaza, a new aid distribution system set up by Israel, backed by the US, is now in place. But there have been problems already, with distribution centres overrun by hungry crowds. The World Food Programme says there are reports of 2 people who have died.
In Israel, large numbers of people have taken to the streets to protest against Prime Minister Netanyahu, calling for the return of the remaining hostages and an immediate ceasefire.
In New York, at the UN Security Council, members were told of the horrors unfolding in the territory. Israel's ambassador told the group Hamas was responsible for the situation.
And then there was this from the US president in just the last few hours when he was asked about the growing humanitarian crisis.
No, we're dealing with the whole situation in Gaza. We're getting food to the people of Gaza. It's been a very nasty situation, very nasty fight. October 7th was a very nasty day, the worst that I think I've ever seen. It was a horrible day, and people aren't going to forget that either. So we'll see how that all works out.
For now, that peace deal remains elusive, but standing alongside the president in the Oval Office earlier, there was some optimism expressed by the Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. He flagged plans to send both sides what he called a new term sheet aimed at resolving the conflict.
I think that we are on the precipice of sending out a new term sheet that hopefully will be delivered later on today. The president is going to review it. And I have some very good feelings about getting to a long-term resolution, temporary ceasefire, and a long-term resolution, a peaceful resolution of that conflict.
Now, lots to go through over the next hour.
I just want to show people some more of the pictures that we've had in the last couple of hours here into the newsroom, which show the World Food Programme warehouse with flour. And you see a lot of people really just trying to get hold of those supplies. I think the staff ended up just leaving, and the chaos and the desperation on the ground. How much do you think the Trump administration really is able to exercise influence fully as it would wish over Netanyahu? Because sometimes American influence on Israel and many other nations can be exaggerated, can't it?
It can, but I think the Trump administration is really trying and frankly doing a lot more than the Biden administration did since October 7th in the last year. There was really a free hand given to the Israeli government totally under the previous administration. Steve Witkoff is trying to achieve a diplomatic miracle. No one thinks it's going to be easy. This is a very determined Israeli government to root out Hamas, even at the tremendous cost of innocent life, up against a terrorist group that has no regard for innocent life among its own people. The reason the aid is being delivered this way is because Hamas cannot be trusted not to steal it. And in fact, Hamas has told its people not to receive this aid, that it's effectively collaborating with the enemy. So it's a very difficult problem to deal with, but what can we do but have hope that Trump and Steve Witkoff are determined to get a ceasefire in place. They're working toward it. And I think we all desperately hope that does happen on behalf of the innocent people in Gaza.
Joe, do you think there's a line that has to be reached within this Trump administration to act more forcefully regarding Israel, or go around them entirely, as we saw with the direct deal with Hamas about the US hostage 2 weeks ago?
Well, first of all, Katrina, they actually have to know what they want to achieve, and they don't seem to know what they're doing. Look, I'm going to be very direct here. Donald Trump owns this. He owns this calamity right now in Gaza. He is the father of it. When he walked away from the ceasefire process that was underway, that President Biden negotiated, and that he joined to get the first phase of hostages out earlier this year, he then walked away from it when Bibi Netanyahu was in Washington and said, let's create Gaza on the Riviera. Let's move the Palestinians out. Well, guess what? That's what the Israelis are doing. And now the Israelis have decided they have a free reign. And I'm a strong supporter of Israel, and I believe they need to go after Hamas, and they need to get these hostages out. But what's happening now is the direct result of America walking away from international partners, walking away from the United Nations, which knows how to do this. Now we're seeing scenes that look like Mogadishu. It did not have to be this way, but absent American leadership and engagement, this is what we now have, where Israelis are still held hostage and Palestinians are suffering, and there's no peaceful end in sight.
But Joel, is it a case that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't want to hear what perhaps the Trump administration is saying? I mean, we saw those images of all the protests within Israel.
Sure. No, look, I'm with you on that. But, there's no message being given to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has free reign right now in Gaza to do what he wants, and he's exercising that. The tapping on the brakes towards the Prime Minister are more related to Iran and possibility of bombing Iran, which President Trump has said don't do it. But not in Gaza. Remember, President Trump was the first person to put on the table the idea of removing 2 million Palestinians from Gaza and clearing the rubble out. That was his idea. He put it forward, and now we're seeing the results.
Robby Soave, what about this idea of progress that we heard from Steve Witkoff today in the context of talks with Iran, talking about a potential ceasefire? We have obviously had a lot of talk of progress and then it doesn't materialise. But what's your reading of what we're hearing?
Yeah, it is very difficult. Progress is slow. I would not say I'm satisfied with the pace of the progress, but the reality is, and I think we all have to acknowledge, there is a greater appetite for peace in the Middle East among the Trump administration than there was among, frankly, all previous Democratic and Republican administrations. Donald Trump is putting pressure on Netanyahu. We can argue about whether it's enough or whether more could be exercised given the tremendous military support we supply to Israel. But there is friction. We hear it reported all the time. The Israeli government is frustrated about it. They want an entirely free hand to pursue their war in Gaza to whatever extent they think is necessary, and they're getting pushback from Trump on the Iran question, on Gaza. Again, you can say, well, it should be even more, and we should totally cut them off. More is being done than was done under the previous administration. When Kamala Harris was asked, Vice President Kamala Harris was asked by CBS what at any point did they do to push back on Netanyahu, she couldn't come up with an answer. So Trump is doing more. Maybe it's not perfect, but I don't see... I think it's as best as we can reasonably hope for to work out these very difficult conflicts in the Middle East among groups that want to fight. Hamas and the Israeli government want to be at war with each other, and there's a lot of innocent people caught up in the middle, and we're doing everything we reasonably can do to bring that to an end.
You're filibustering, Robby. You're filibustering. There's literally no evidence to that at all, none whatsoever. That Donald Trump was putting any pressure on Israel. I'm a strong supporter of Israel. I've been a strong supporter of Israel's ability to defend itself against Hamas. But what President Biden did was actually put the brakes on preventing these kinds of humanitarian crises that we're now seeing and negotiated ceasefires. Donald Trump has not done any of that. And in fact, Donald Trump is not a peace president. He walked away from the one diplomatic deal we had in the region that was sustained, and that was the Iran nuclear deal. Now he seems to want to get it back. He's trying to get back to the Obama deal. He's the one that let Iran out of the nuclear box. So you're putting messages forward that don't comply with the actual policies that he's enacting. And I think we just need to be straight about that.
The initial ceasefire was pulled off by Steve Witkoff.
The initial ceasefire was pulled off. No, that is not accurate. The initial ceasefire was negotiated for 9 months by Joe Biden. And at the end of his term, Steve Witkoff said we support that. While President Biden was president, it was enacted.
I think the point is Netanyahu was not on board until Trump was president.
Netanyahu was not on board until President Trump said he supported Joe Biden's ceasefire plan.
Robby, Joel, I think we'll just draw it to a close. Joel, can I ask you one very, very quick question? Because I'm getting told we've got to go for a break. But is there something that is never said in US politics, which is the US will never completely pull the plug on Israel, regardless of which administration is in power in either country? Because there are, for example, very, very key intelligence links and security links between those two nations, aren't there?
Well, there's more than just security. There's deep affinity country to country. And I don't think we should have to pull the plug on Israel to resolve and deal with this issue effectively. in terms of getting the hostages out and getting aid to the Palestinians and a long-term solution to the conflict. You need American engagement. The problem we have now is there is no American engagement. There's sort of press conferences here or there, a couple of statements from President Trump, no methodical diplomacy underway with our allies to make sure that what he's saying actually becomes a reality.
Well, there's been growing criticism of the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. Today we heard from the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas.
Israel's strikes in Gaza go beyond what is necessary to fight Hamas. Humanitarian aid cannot be weaponized. It has to be in accordance with the humanitarian principles, and therefore we have the humanitarian aid organizations that are able to provide that aid.
It's not just Kaja Kallas, who we cut off a bit there, apologies for that, but we have seen a number of responses from world leaders in the last week or so.
Indeed, just last week, the UK suspended trade talks with Israel. The Swedish Prime Minister said its foreign ministry would summon Israel's ambassador to Stockholm in protest over a lack of humanitarian aid for people in Gaza.
While the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said he no longer understands Israel's objectives, adding that Israel's actions in Gaza could no longer be justified as fighting terrorism. Well, the EU is one of the largest donors of humanitarian aid to Gaza. At the UN Security Council today, concerns about the humanitarian situation in Gaza were front and centre. Danny Danon, Israel's permanent representative to the United Nations, said that aid was getting into Gaza.
We are not only allowing aid in, but we are ensuring it reaches the people who need it most. Just this Monday, for example, 170 trucks carrying humanitarian aid entered Gaza through Kerem Shalom crossing. These trucks delivered food, medical supplies and vaccines. Every single delivery was carefully coordinated to prevent looting by Hamas. Since May 19, almost 9,000 tons of aid have entered Gaza, again carrying food, medical supplies, flour for bakeries and baby formula.
Let's bring our panel back in here, Robby Soave and Joel Rubin. In addition to Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador there, we also heard from the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations earlier, who said that watching what was happening in Palestine without us having hearts to do something, he said, is beyond the ability of any normal human being to tolerate. Robby, when we're hearing the condemnations, we just played some of them there from other world leaders, why have we not heard that kind of language from President Trump?
Well, I think President Trump has spoken out about the horror that people caught in this conflict are facing in a general way. But, I mean, it's important to remember that if this was easy to fix, we would just fix it. This is a civilian population, and embedded within them is a bloodthirsty terrorist organization that perpetrated a massive terrorist attack against its neighbor Israel that refuses to surrender.
Robby, sorry for interrupting you, but just purely on the humanitarian crisis, what is being done to a population there, to babies, to children, to innocent civilians. And we hear this language from so many other nations, but we don't hear it from the US.
I think results are what matter. And as we were previously debating, Steve Witkoff is attempting to get a ceasefire in the region, and that would be the best thing for the people who are suffering there. Thoughts and prayers are something we should all offer, and I would hope that President Trump and U.S. leaders talk about that. But the most important thing for them to be doing is working on an actual peace deal and then getting in a humanitarian aid without the fear of Hamas pilfering it from the needing, starving people.
And Joel, we heard that Mohammed Sinwar had definitely been killed, according to the Israelis, but we've not had confirmation of that from Hamas. I mean, is it clear, in your view, what exactly Israel is trying to achieve here? They have always said, obviously, consistency. They want to eliminate Hamas. But in military terms, is that possible? And where do you think the next few days are heading?
Yeah, Geetha, I want to answer two parts. First of all, why no empathy? Trump's not known for empathy. That's not his strong suit. He's not going to show it in this instance. And that's just a sad reality that we're in right now. And when it comes to Israeli military strategy, it looks like Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a decision that at this stage, the hostages getting them out in exchange for allowing Hamas to breathe is just not worth it. And that's a real complex box that he's put himself in, because as you've seen earlier, the Israeli people don't like that. The Israeli people want the hostages out. But I think we're seeing the military strategy now morphing into an overall conquest strategy of Gaza that is part of the long-term vision of his most extreme members in the government, who want to see a retaking of the Gaza Strip. And then, of course, what comes next, who knows? It's a very difficult, nightmarish mindset. But I think that's what we're now seeing as a military strategy and the sort of diminishment of the prioritization of the hostage release, if it means allowing Hamas to continue to exist in Gaza.
But Joel, although it is it's a sort of unpalatable argument for so many in the Middle East and around the world, but when you're looking at a population of children and women who are facing starvation imminently, they say, what about the idea of those people being allowed to leave if they want to into Jordan and Egypt, the immediate neighbours? What about those incredibly wealthy Gulf states that President Trump was touring around just a couple of weeks ago? If that then did allow a political negotiation, because as Israel says, Hamas could actually just hand over the hostages and walk away.
Yeah, I mean, look, Hamas is the one that's prolonging this fight ad nauseum. We know that. The question is can the rational leaders of a democratic nation like Israel accept that? And then what about the diplomacy? What about President Trump? What was his agenda in the Gulf? Did he ask these countries to do that? Did he ask the Egyptians to open up the borders? The answer is no, and it's probably because he would have gotten a no. The Palestinians in Gaza are stuck. They're stuck in that place. They're not going to go anywhere. Of course, if they choose to leave, if Israel opens up the doors and says they'll send them out somewhere, perhaps. But that's really not a likely scenario. So we do need to see a scenario where all these players get together. And this goes back to my earlier point, where the United States is using our diplomatic leverage and power and relationships across the region to have a plan, which we currently don't have.
So, I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing.
I actually thought that when this big, beautiful bill came along. I mean, everything he's done on Doge gets wiped out in the first year.
I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. My personal opinion.
Big or beautiful, but maybe not both, says Elon Musk. Well, just to remind you about that legislation, which narrowly passed the House of Representatives just last week. It's now en route to the Senate. That includes multi-trillion-dollar tax breaks, but also increases to spending on things like defence and immigration policies.
And it's that, as you heard in that clip, that caught Elon Musk offside, it seems. The Doge department's own website claims it's made savings of $175 billion already, though we should point out that some analysis, including by our own team here at the BBC, indicates that statement lacks some evidence.
By contrast, some estimates suggest that the big, beautiful budget bill could increase government spending by $600 billion in the next fiscal year. Let's bring our panel back in here. Robby Soave, senior editor at Reason and host of Rising on Hill TV, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Robby, to you first. What's your view of the Elon Musk-Donald Trump relationship? Are cracks starting to appear over the big, beautiful budget bill?
They are. And look, I mean, I share Elon Musk's sadness that the cuts to government spending are not going to be as tangible as he hoped they would be. It's a damning indictment of our system if the richest and smartest tech man in the world can't fix government spending. And actually, the two most Doge-aligned Republican members of Congress, Thomas Massey in the House and Senator Rand Paul, similarly hate this bill for just the reasons Elon Musk pointed out. It's not making any of the kinds of things that he uncovered permanent. So I'm afraid, and Americans vote for Republicans all the time who promise to cut government spending, and then when they put Republicans in charge of the government, the spending gets cut not at all or very slightly, or is then, canceled out by new spending. This is another example of that. And one day, Republicans, Trump included, maybe he has some special magic powers, but have to face their voters and honestly say, yeah, we promised we would do all these things, but once again, yet again, we moved the football out of the way at the last minute. American football.
And Joel Rubin, I mean, we're seeing Musk come to the end of his time formally as part of the administration. How worried would you be if you were Donald Trump about what Musk might say? Or do you think Trump will try and hold him very, very close? Because obviously he's immensely powerful, he's an immensely successful businessman, and he has criticised a bit the tariff policy when that first started to hit, didn't he? So this is the sort of certainly at least the second time he's spoken out on some aspect of policy.
You bet. Well, maybe Democrat Elon Musk is reappearing. But what I have to say is that this was a total flop, this Doge experiment. It's still out there and lingering. But, it was anti-democratic to begin with. The president gave it as a gift, his biggest campaign donor, and Elon Musk, and gave him some headline opportunities there. But Doge never did its work in a manner that was aligned with American democracy. And we're seeing the results, which is that Congress will reject all of its work, except for maybe some of the agency cuts, but nothing like where they were heading. And, of course, the White House itself is not interested in advocating for it either. So I'm with Robby on this, except for the fact that this isn't just a failure of Republican ideology. It's a failure of governance. It's a failure to understand how the system is supposed to work. Washington's not the problem here. The problem is that the Doge people did not have an interest in working in Washington.
Robby, what do you say to that? Were these things destined to fail anyway as soon as Congress kind of caught up with the fast pace that we had seen from Elon Musk and his team?
We have a huge failure of Congress to actually pass legislation, period. Congress hates doing its job. They're happy to, Congress is Republican controlled, and so they're all affirming of everything Trump does, but they don't make it law. And anything that can be undone or done via executive order can be undone by a subsequent executive order. So here it was very clear what had to happen. There had to be a rescissions package. You can, pause funding that has already been approved, but eventually you have to send it back for a vote to Congress. Republicans control Congress, so there's no excuse for not doing that except sheer laziness or some sense that if we say we cut spending and then don't actually do it, we won't have to face any blowback when it turns out that, oh, this was actually popular. I disagree that it's a failure of democracy. I think when Trump announced here's, spending for nebulous foreign projects, most people, if you look at the polls, don't want a lot of that. They want it cut. But Congress failed to do it, even though there's a clear mechanism for doing it. So I'm not, making any excuses. I think it is a very sad end that Doge is coming to, and it started out real promising.
But if I can add one more thought, though, on this, which I think is very important, is that it was poll tested in Wisconsin. There was an election. Elon Musk was very much involved in it a month or so ago. And Elon Musk's candidate, his preferred candidate, got walloped by double digits. It's not politically popular. The cuts he's proposing, like cuts to Medicaid, cuts to health care, cuts to the environment, you name it, you go down the line. The American people did not like what he was targeting.
President Trump's relationship with cryptocurrency has somewhat evolved over time. In his first term, he referred to cryptocurrencies as not money, saying they had a value based on thin air.
More recently, on the campaign trail, he made history as the first major candidate to accept donations in the form of cryptocurrency.
Then, once in office, he launched his own crypto, known simply as Trump. Just last week, he held a private dinner for the coin's top investors.
And then there was this today from the Vice President, J.D. Vance. He's been speaking at the annual Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas.
Unelected bureaucrats and foreign competitors write the rules for us. And I'm here today to say loud and clear, with President Trump, crypto finally has a champion and an ally in the White House. When it comes to crypto, I think the last several years have made it clear that we're talking about genuine, ground-up innovation, one that's already improving the well-being of tens of millions of our fellow citizens. I believe it's 50 million Americans own Bitcoin, and I believe that's going to be 100 million before too long.
Well, let's bring our panel back in here, Robby Soave and Joel Rubin. Robby, a champion and an ally for crypto in the White House, as the Vice President put it there. Why is this new obsession with cryptocurrency that we're seeing? What is the attraction for Trump and his inner circle, for President Trump?
Well, crypto has long been a monetary technological innovation that people on all kinds of farther out there sides of the political spectrum had some interest in, including my own ideology, libertarians, who view some suspicion of the monetary system as controlled by the Federal Reserve and say, you know what, should there be some other market-derived financial mechanism for people to invest in if they want to? Obviously, there's a lot of instability in this sector. There has been. You know, risk your own money at your own peril, that sort of thing. But what we are talking about now in Congress is a regulatory package for how to deal with crypto, and I would advocate a light touch. Certainly there should be some guardrails put in place, and I think J.D. Vance and Donald Trump signaling that the Republican Party is going to be the faction that is supportive of innovation in this sector, and a regulatory light touch is important to a base of independent thinking, libertarian thinking voters and personalities who very much want that kind of ethos expressed.
Jill, what's your view? Why do you see this interest in cryptocurrency with President Trump and his team?
Well, one could be a cynic and say it's for the cash, but you know, I'm not a cynic today. I'm an optimist, and you know, it's not the hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone into his re-election campaign. Could it be, Robby? I don't know, but I do think it's a fascinating technology, and I do think that as Robby points out, look, there are Americans who want it. There's a global market for it. One of the challenges is to get our regulations aligned with the rest of the world. You know, right now we don't have a regulatory environment. And when you don't have a regulatory environment, it means that your businesses aren't really sure about how best to operate and if they're going to have certainty in their investments. And so we need to make sure that we're aligned. And so when Congress gets its hands on this, we need to be aligned with the rest of the world with rules that ensure a level playing field for crypto companies here and certainty over the long run that provides stability for the American consumers.
For a final last thought at the end of the show, Robby, we were talking there about how interested President Trump and his team are in this, but listening to Mike there, do you think it is something that the American people are interested in, or are there bigger issues?
Well, there are certainly bigger issues, but you know what I was hearing there made me think, well, we'll have a need to build more electric power plants. That, you know, building more things is good. That can create jobs and opportunities as well. Obviously, you need some kind of regulatory framework to mitigate third-party harms like noise and things like that. But you know, as much as we love our countryside rivers and things like that, we can't just, you know, preserve the past at all costs. We have to be forward-looking, and we're definitely going to need more electrical energy. That's a great point, and I think Trump might be well-positioned to explain to his voters in rural places, older voters, why the future is worth getting on board with for your own economic prospects often enough.
Although it is often that President Trump is looking back to what was big in the industrial heartland, isn't it, when he's talking about bringing back manufacturing and so on. Joel, what do you think about the interest level amongst the American public on this subject?
You know, I think there's a tremendous amount of concern about factory towns across the country losing hope. And essentially, this is why President Trump got elected, and much of what Joe Biden was trying to rectify during his term as well, when we got $2 trillion of money appropriated for rebuilding the heartland and factory towns across the country. And so I think along the lines of what Robby is saying, look, this is part of the reindustrialization of America. Technology matters. We need to be the global leader for it. And these sort of additional problems related to externalities, they have to be dealt with and mitigated. People should not be afraid to be in their homes by the countryside and then have nonstop ringing in their ears. That needs to be fixed. But if there are opportunities to grow the economy and get investment in and rebuild towns across the country that have been damaged for decades, that's overall a positive.
And Robby, on the technology development front, it's not just Bitcoin, isn't it? When you look at sort of AI data centers, critics worry about the climate implications of that because they're very, very energy demanding. They also have an implication for people if they're built in their locality. Do you think there are these sorts of issues that are going to increasingly play a part in how people vote in future?
Well, maybe. I mean, climate is, specifically a concern to more of progressive activist type people. I mean, we're all, concerned about the climate on some level, but we're, not going to turn back the clock or all live much more without access to material goods and material comforts in order to pursue that goal. So it's about finding some kind of balance and pursuing newer and greener sources of energy whenever possible. But we can't, ask people to make tremendous personal sacrifices in order to do that while the rest of the world is still, responsible for a lot more pollution than we are. And actually think of how these technologies can impact and help people in more developing parts of the world. Going back to Bitcoin for just a second, if you live somewhere where there's an unstable economy or the government is not trustworthy or they massively devalue the currency, you might want to have your assets in something like Bitcoin other than the currency of the country. That's less the case here in the U.S., but it could be the case in other places.
All right, well, we'll end on that future-looking note.